Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So welcome everyone to our 30-second deep dive. Looks like a small group tonight, but I assume people are out enjoying the beautiful evening for solstice, and we'll hopefully take a look at this recording afterwards. So our deep dive is a monthly online webinar hosted by First Things First Okanagan, where we present different perspectives on climate solutions. And those of us who are in the Okanagan live on the traditional and unceded territory of the Silk people, and we are grateful to reside on this beautiful land. For generations, many Indigenous groups and communities have celebrated their culture and heritage on or around the summer solstice. In Penticton, Indigenous Peoples Day is being celebrated tomorrow, June 21st, at Okanagan Lake Park. There will be a sunrise ceremony starting at 4 a.m. for those of you who are up early, and afternoon festivities from 1 until 6 p.m. And there will be a variety of activities and entertainment that honor and celebrate the rich cultures and traditions of Indigenous peoples, including traditional music, food, dance, and storytelling. And if you live elsewhere, we encourage you to look for similar celebrations that are taking place in your community. So with the solstice comes the start of summer, and with it, increased risk of wildfires, extreme heat, and drought, which many are apprehensive about. And many people are doing what they can to curb emissions. No one person or organization can solve the climate crisis, but cumulatively our actions all help. Tonight, we're going to learn about how one business, Tin Whistle Brewing, set about measuring its environmental impact and then took steps to reduce its carbon footprint. Tin Whistle is now a certified carbon neutral brewery, and it's the first in BC, so congratulations on that. Wife and husband duo Alexis Esseltine and Timothy Schoon became owners of Tin Whistle Brewing in 2020 during the pandemic. Alexis is the environmental lead for the brewery. She has years of experience as an environmental auditor, having audited manufacturers in North America, Europe, and Asia. Most recently, she was the sustainability manager at the Vancouver Aquarium, leading them to Canada's greenest employer status. And Alexis has been recognized as a Clean 50 emerging leader for outstanding contributions to sustainable development and clean capitalism in Canada. And she's also earned a Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal for her community involvement. So with that, I'd like to welcome you, Alexis, and we really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us tonight. Just before you begin, just a reminder to everyone that we'll have a Q&A afterwards, so anyone who has questions can type them into the chat, or with having fewer people, we might just open the mic up. Yeah, so Alexis, you can go ahead now. Thanks.
Amazing. Thanks for having me, everybody. It's great to see everybody on the good old Zoom. Sue, do you need to screen share with me, or do I just, oh wait, I think I can do it myself. Hold on, I'll be self-sufficient. Here we go. Excellent. Okay. Perfect. Can everyone see me there on the screen? Sue, I'm good?
That's good, yes.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so I'm just gonna move a couple of things on my screen so I can see what the heck is going on. There we go, perfect. All right, everyone, thank you for having me, and thanks for the background, so I really appreciate it. It's been really fun for us to become a part of the craft beer industry in BC. We don't come from beer. Obviously, you heard from Sue's background of me that I don't come from beer, but it's been this incredible conduit for us to do really amazing things in the environmental space. And you don't always think about craft beer or the alcohol industry being progressive that way necessarily. I mean, you hear of the odd organic producer or people thinking about waste, but we've really tried to take Tin Whistle and really push so that we could become a leader in the BC craft beer industry and the Canadian beer industry, and to kind of use Tin Whistle as a place where we can try new things and then share out with our industry and become kind of this starting place for some really interesting and kind of ideas that challenge the status quo of brewing as usual. So today I want to cover a few things. I'll just give you a little background on who Tin Whistle Brewing is, if you don't know of us. I'll talk a little bit about the reality in the natural world and the risk to us as breweries, what we as breweries can kind of do about it and what Tin Whistle's doing about it. I'll do a quick what you as consumers can do about it, and then we'll jump into the Q&A at the end. So let's get started. I'm hoping people have heard of Tin Whistle. Tin Whistle is the original craft brewery of the Okanagan, the South Okanagan. We have been around since 1995. We were actually the 12th brewery to open in the entire province of BC back in 1995. So some people don't know that history, but we have a long-standing history in the region. Our brand very much reflects the Okanagan region with all of our packaging and labels featuring local flora and fauna, everything from black widow spiders to ogopogos to coyotes and peaches. Tin Whistle's brand has always reflected the region that we live in, and also the beer styles and the beers that we create have always very much represented the region. So that's kind of an interesting kind of background. Our mission is great beer, less impact. So taste matters, but so does our environmental impact. Our goal as a brewery is to be commercially successful because we can't do what we do if we don't have a business, while also working to drive down our environmental impact. When we took over the brewery in 2020, we brought this mission to the forefront. We knew the craft beer industry was ripe for innovation in this way, and we wanted to bring our values to the table. We're parents of 3 young kids. We know climate change is real. I don't think any of us are denying that. And we wanted to do our part through our own small business to make a change, and also to show the industry what was possible, and to inspire others. So some things we did kind of, I did year 1 and then year 4, just to kind of give you a bit of a summary of where we kind of started with all of our environmental work, and then where we've kind of gone now that we're in year 4. Year 1, we did a lot of really quick changes. We moved the kind of primary package of the Tin Whistle beer from bottles to cans. Cans are more recyclable, they have a value, and they never lose. Aluminum doesn't lose or degrade in quality as you recycle it, and so it does require energy to recycle, but it can be reused again and again and again to make more aluminum cans. We rebranded, so we kept with the flora and fauna of the region, but we made it much more relevant and more fun. We became carbon neutral, the first in BC to be carbon neutral, really hoping to kind of come out strong. We have carbon neutral, a banner that says carbon neutral brewery along the top of all of our cans on all of our labels. So we are very much promoting that work, because we think it's important to cue to our industry what's possible through beer. We also installed a really small batch brewing system. It allows us to brew batches that are about 100 liters in size. Typically for us, we're brewing 2,000 liter or 4,000 liter batches of beer. This little small batch system allows us to experiment and try new styles, and also to try new ingredients. Some of the cool stuff coming off that equipment right now is, I'll talk about kind of year 4, but we're actually starting to trial beer made from other people's waste. On Earth Day this year, we released our cherry blossom Japanese lager, which is actually made with the wasted rice from the sake brewing process. If you didn't know, we actually have a sake brewery. It's owned by Khan, who owns Kojo Sushi down by Skaha Lake. And he brought a sake brewery here from Richmond, and they're brewing Okanagan Penticton sake here. And we took 2 months worth of their waste to make one batch of this beer. It has since sold out. We still have it on draft in our tasting room, and that's the end of it. It was a huge seller for us, and we've used this small batch system to test out using other people's waste to make beer, which to me is really exciting and really it represents the local region because these wastes are local, but it also helps for other businesses to reduce their waste, which is great, and it helps us make really interesting and compelling beers that others aren't making. In that first year, we grew our production 5 times while still reducing our total carbon emissions. So you can see that there can be a business value to doing what we do while also allowing us to be thoughtful environmentally. Year 4, fast forward, that's the kind of year we're in now. On Earth Day, alongside that cherry blossom Japanese lager sake beer we made, we announced that we were a zero waste to landfill brewery. That means in our production process of brewing beer, we send absolutely no waste to landfill. All of our wastes are either we've eliminated those wastes or we've reuse, reduce, or recycle those wastes in some way. They never hit a landfill, which is pretty impressive for a manufacturing process that is quite rich in ingredients and packaging and all these other things. And then I note there that we did start making beer from other people's quote unquote waste. We don't call it waste because it doesn't sound very markety to call things waste, but we certainly highlight it on our labels as being kind of an upcycled or reused ingredient from someone else's production process. I mentioned the cherry blossom lager, but we also did a wasted grape beer as well. We did both a Merlot actually and a Gewürztraminer version. These beers were made with the skins left over from the wine harvest. So they took the grapes, they pressed them for the juice for the wine, and then we took the skins to make beer. Super delicious. There is no recipe book to make beer with waste. Our brewer Matt is crazy inventive, and we're coming up with new ways of making beer from ingredients that people have never made beer with before. So that's kind of who we are year 1 to year 4. Let's talk a little bit about the reality and the risk in the beer industry, like why we care and why we're doing this stuff. I like to do this little activity with people where you close your eyes. So we're going to do a little sharing. Don't hate me. Maybe we'll use the chat function here. But what I want you to do, you're sitting at home right now on solstice, and I want you to close your eyes and I want you to think about the most magical place in the world to you, the place where you feel most at peace, the place that brings you such comfort, the place that is so meaningful to you. So take a few minutes in your brain with your eyes closed and think about what that place is. And if you'll share that with us in the chat, that would be wonderful, because I would love to hear what your place is. And there's a reason for this, so just trust the process here. Okay, I see Ellison Provincial Park from Cathay. I see the lake where I spent summers from Lori. What else do we got, guys? I saw Steve on the call from the BC Government Liquor Store. So Steve, you better come up to the plate. We're waiting for you. I'll type mine in here. So Steve's got in the forest above Naramata, on top of a mountain from Sue. I've got Kitsilano Beach at low tide for me. Corinne's got my backyard. Love it. So I do this exercise mainly just to highlight, and the answers are always somewhere in the natural world for people. No one ever talks about their favorite space being an office building or their cubicle. People always talk about, when I do this exercise, people always talk about someplace in the natural world. And for me, that's really why we do the work that we do, is to protect the natural world. And so some of the realities of the natural world right now, as we know, I don't think this will be a surprise for many of you, but I do like to kind of ground it for people just to remind them why we do what we do and why we care so much about these natural places, why it matters. And it matters because climate change is here and is obviously real. The consequences we're seeing are things like hot, dry summers and drought and more extreme weather events and less snowpack and sea level rise and all of these kind of consequences we hear about, kind of all the time. But the reality is that there is some real there's also issues around water supply, as we know, with less snowpack, less drinking water, more water restrictions. These are kind of some of the realities that our natural world that we care so much about is facing. And this threatens, for breweries, it really threatens business as usual. And I actually take these slides and I've presented to the BC Craft Brewers Guild conference and was invited to present to the Canadian Craft Brewers Guild as well on this work and on this, what I'm talking to you about, because it's so critical that we understand what's happening in the natural world around us that we care about, but also to look at it through the lens of a brewery and a brewery owner. So the reality for us as breweries is that our grain is one of the key ingredients in beer. We use wheat and oats and barley. The reality is it has more protein. These grains have more protein because of the droughts and the really hot, dry summers. And the reality is that proteins mean a more hazy beer, not a crystal clear beer, more hazy beer. And we don't always want hazier beers. So we're having to understand the grain and the profile of the grain that's coming in so that we can compensate for it in the beer we make. Our supply routes are threatened. We ship things from Vancouver. There's lots of kind of depots and distribution centers in Vancouver area. And when we have mudslides caused by droughts and forest fires and all of these things, we can't actually access supplies into the Okanagan. So it threatens our ability to get the materials we need to make beer. With water supplies in question, there's been a lot of conversations this summer. If water restrictions go into play, we may not be able to brew beer. And I don't think there's a risk necessarily in the Okanagan because we've been working really closely on that. But there are places like in the Sunshine Coast where Persephone Brewing actually couldn't brew last year because there wasn't enough water just for drinking water. And so that obviously really threatens business as usual for us. And there's also other impacts. Hops, which are like a giant vine that grow in the big giant lattices kind of in the air. Hops are a really critical ingredient in beer as well, alongside grain. And the yields are down again because of the hot, dry summers. Then the alpha acids are down, and people probably don't know what alpha acids are, but the alpha acids are what help hops to kind of be effective in beer and to really give it a lot of flavor. And so we're getting fewer hops, but we're also getting hops that don't have the same kind of effectiveness as an ingredient, and so they're not delivering as much flavor as what we hope. So this is some of the things that are threatening our business as usual. This is a little hop yield thing. You probably don't need to know too much about that, but that just shows about the yields and the alpha acid volumes being down. But here, I always like to ground it with some reality, but then talk about the really optimistic side about what we can do about it. People always ask me, are you optimistic? And I say, I'm optimistic because what's the alternative? So let's jump into what we can do about it. So how do we make a brewery a force for environmental good? So at Tin Whistle, we've done 3 things. 1 is we've measured, 2 is we prioritize, and 3 is we have a certain attitude. So let's dig into each of those a little bit more. 1 is measure. You've probably heard, if you've gone to business school or you've kind of heard this common adage, you can't manage what you don't measure. That's kind of a critical part of it. You could wander around your brewery and say, oh, this looks like it's not good and that looks like it could be bad, but until you measure, you don't really know what your impacts are. So for measuring, we've used, and you could do this at home or in organizations that you work with, or maybe in your own business if you have a business. We've started to gather, we gathered right from day 1 a lot of data about what was happening in our business. We use things like our utility bills from the city of Penticton that talked about how much energy we were using every month. We looked at different purchase orders from our suppliers, and you may look at receipts or things like that from your own kind of side of the world, and see, how much packaging you're using or how much of this or that's coming in through your business. And then we can also gather more data just by generally being curious and asking a lot of questions and kind of digging in. One cool way of being really curious is to do a dumpster dive. I've done these in a lot of businesses over time, and we've done one here at Tin Whistle, where basically you dive in a dumpster, or you could dump your garbage out on the ground too if you wanted, and look what's in it. It's really interesting, because that was the start for us of where we started to measure what waste was happening and what was coming out of our process so that we could better understand how to be better, and how to do it differently. We also talked to our waste hauler, who's the person who picks up our garbage, and asked them if they could weigh our waste for us, like our big dumpster, and weigh our waste for us. This was really early on before we had a waste program and we were zero waste. So we had to gather that data. So there's lots of places where you can gather that data. There's also really great resources. I put a little picture here of David Cassian from the city of Penticton, who's a great guy. We just recently worked with him to actually get some more data on a specific piece of equipment on our roof. We have a chiller on our roof that chills a giant walk-in cooler that holds our beer tanks. But the chiller isn't working. It's near end of life. It's at about 25 years old, not super efficient. We really wanted to start to understand how it was using energy. So we were curious. The city has this great little motor logger, with a little bit of software where you can actually just attach the motor logger. It's magnetized to your motors, and it'll actually start to tell you how much your motor's turning on and off. And it'll really help. It helps to kind of understand, again, just to give you some measurements and some data, because if you can't measure it and you don't have any information there, you can't do anything about it. So we always start with gathering the data, and we've done that from day one. But this project with the motor logger was just done a few months ago. So we never really stop. So one is the measurement. So you can see here, this is an example of how much energy we're using. This is from gathering all that data that we talked about. So we use about 50,000. This was a little bit older data. I haven't pulled this year's yet, but 50,000 kilowatt hours per year of electricity we use. That's for lights and compressors and pumps and things. About 418 gigajoules of natural gas for heating our space and for heating the water that's used in beer. We were sending almost 12,000 kilos of waste to landfill. This was the early on data. This was the starting point. And so you can see in that little bottom chart there, with the bar chart there, that's actually the carbon emissions associated with that consumption. So from electricity, you can see from that 50,000 kilowatt hours we were using, that had a part in our carbon footprint that was 0.57 tons of CO2 equivalent, as part of our carbon footprint. You can see the heat, that's the natural gas there, that's the 418 gigajoules. See how it had almost 22 tons of CO2 equivalent. So it had a very big part of our carbon footprint from that heat. You can see that doesn't look that big when you compare the kilowatt hours to the gigajoules of natural gas. But the reality is that the carbon footprint was really substantial from using natural gas. And that garbage piece there too was a fairly significant part of our carbon footprint. So we use a carbon calculator. That's where this data at the bottom is coming from, but it helps us to kind of understand the impact of what we're using. And that kind of feeds into my next part, because you'll just remember to take note there of what carbon impact the electricity actually had. Because our electricity is so clean in BC, and this carbon calculator takes into account that this electricity is being purchased in BC. Our electricity is very clean in BC because it's mainly hydro. And so it has a very low impact on our carbon footprint, whereas the natural gas has a very large component, is a big part of our carbon footprint. So then the next part of that is really around, we've talked about what we're going to do about it. We're going to measure, but then we're going to prioritize, because the reality is that some changes make bigger impacts than others do. And you can't do everything. You can't do everything all at once. So you really need to prioritize. And that's what we've done at Tin Whistle. So we've prioritized first our biggest impacts. So you saw that natural gas there had a really big impact on our carbon footprint. So if we can make a difference in natural gas, we're making a much more of a difference to our carbon footprint than we are if we focus on our electricity consumption and try to work on that. So that's one of the things. And what we've kind of done around, especially around the natural gas piece, is to work with Fortis BC. They actually do free commercial energy audits for businesses. And so they came on site with an energy engineer, walked through our facility, took measurements, observed, and actually came out with a report of almost 25 different action items we could take to further reduce our natural gas consumption. And some of those we have obviously taken on, and we continue to take more and more of those projects on to really drive our natural gas use down. We've also done a lot of work to prioritize and stuff by working with local colleges and universities. The big one for us is Okanagan College. They have a BC Beverage Technology Access Center called BC BTAC. We have about 3 projects going on with them now with their students and that research facility that operates literally just down the street from us in Penticton, to help us to prioritize and help us to better understand our opportunities. And we also work a lot with our suppliers, because the reality is they know a lot about what they do and they can really help us to get better, because they know their little niches. So we've really worked a lot to prioritize to really figure out where we can get the biggest bang for our buck. So again, I talked about the natural gas is kind of our biggest opportunity. So we've done the energy audit. We brought a gas fitter on site to optimize our kettle efficiency, which means we have a big giant brewing kettle where we brew and we heat 2,000 liters of water every batch. And so we brought a gas fitter in to make sure our kettle was operating at maximum efficiency. When we're buying new equipment, especially natural gas equipment, we are always right from the get-go looking at how much energy it consumes. You can't change the amount of energy something consumes after the fact. Once you've bought it, you've kind of bought it and you've got that consumption for the next, number of years of the life of that equipment. So we always move everything forward and really think about it in the purchasing decision. We're asking suppliers, asking people we're buying from, how much energy does that consume? How much natural gas does that piece of equipment consume, so that we're not impacting ourselves further down the road. We've also just done things around less around, just buying equipment, but even more just around changing of behaviors, right? So much as, turning lights off and closing cooler doors to keep the cold air in and the heat out. We've installed thermostats, electronic thermostats, so that they are automatically set. So it makes us be a little more conscious and a little more able to reduce our use. So those are just a couple of the quick ways that we've kind of prioritized to really drive down our consumption. The important part for us is the reduction is really important in driving our use down and prioritizing and driving our use down, because we're a carbon neutral brewery. And so it's really important that we don't use more and that we constantly reduce, because we buy carbon offsets to bring ourselves to carbon neutral. And so we are really targeting reduction, because that's the best way at this point to really reduce our carbon footprint. We do buy a few carbon offsets through the Great Bear Rainforest project we have bought through, and through an anaerobic digestion facility in the Lower Mainland, to help us to bring ourselves to carbon neutral. But the goal obviously is always to reduce so far that you don't have a carbon footprint left. But we aren't that far yet, but we are certainly working towards it. And as you could see just from that recent image with David from the city of Penticton, this is a regular everyday thing for us to really push and really work to reduce. It isn't something we only do on Earth Day or we only do every so often. It really is a daily initiative for us here at Tin Whistle. Other things we can do about it. So we saw we really focus in on that natural gas component, because obviously that's a big part of our carbon footprint. But the other piece for us that's fairly large is the waste going to landfill. So that was a big part of our carbon footprint. So actually we've taken ourselves completely to zero waste going to landfill. We got ourselves, a couple years ago down to just one garbage bin for the whole entire facility. And now we're down to nothing. We asked for bulk packaging from our suppliers, so they provide it in reusable totes and things like that. We take back a lot of our packaging. So Steve, who's on the call, actually brings me the cardboard flats we put beer in. He brings them back to me from the BC Government, Penticton Plaza BC Government liquor store down the street. So we reuse those. I have customers and consumers bringing back the plastic beer toppers that you see. I've taken thousands and thousands back, and I even give people an incentive to bring them back. And so we're reusing a ton of our waste. We're recycling anything else that's left. We go to the Return It Depot locally. We go to Blue Planet Recycling for some of the funkier stuff. And we're just really focused on those good old 3 Rs that we all learned in elementary school back in the day. But by prioritizing those things and just eliminating waste altogether, we've been able to go to zero waste to landfill. So to kill that piece of our carbon footprint altogether has been very meaningful. Here's some pictures there. You can see our reused cardboard flats there, and our blue, you see the blue PacTech ring. So if you ever see Tin Whistle beer on shelf, you may see different kind of plastic toppers, and that's just a really good signal to you that we're reusing all of these plastic PacTechs. They're made of really heavy duty plastic that can basically live on forever. So they'll just go on and on. You can see the plastic straps and all these other things that we're recycling locally as well. Last thing that we're doing about it, we talked about measuring, we talked about prioritizing, and the last thing is about attitude. And I think this really matters to all of us and in our own personal lives as well as in our business, is about getting started and not letting perfection get in the way of progress. We don't know everything. We don't know all of the data. We haven't measured everything that we possibly could, but we still continue to work on gathering the data. And while we're gathering, we're still acting on the information that we have. We're not letting that idea of being perfect getting in the way of progressing and moving along this journey, because it really is a journey. No one's perfect at it. No one knows everything. One of the examples about not letting perfection get in the way of progress is around, there's quite a significant amount of carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, released when we ferment beer. That's a byproduct of fermentation. So we are starting to measure that so we understand how much CO2 is actually going out from beer making. But we could invest in a multi-$1,000 piece of equipment that would capture that CO2 and actually clean it and then allow us to reuse it to carbonate our beer. That would be the perfect solution. But that solution is hundreds of thousands of dollars and way out of reach for us. So instead, we haven't let perfection get in the way of progress. We've made progress. We're working with Okanagan College, again, with that BC Beverage Technology Center. We've actually built a fully functional algae bioreactor. You know what algae is. It's that green kind of pond scummy stuff you see in the water a lot. Algae actually goes through photosynthesis like a tree does. So algae absorbs carbon dioxide, which we're releasing from fermenting beer. So it will absorb carbon dioxide and instead release oxygen in exchange. We like oxygen. That's because we breathe oxygen in, right? And so we actually have these giant totes, these big plastic giant totes that we've made into systems that actually support algae to live. They have the right lights and the right filters and circulation, so that we're growing algae in these giant totes, and then we are capturing the carbon dioxide from our fermentation process, and we're feeding it to the algae, who's converting it into oxygen. So really cool partnering together with a research institution, post-secondary institution that has the ability to do cool stuff and get funding for it. And we're providing this space where we can try these things so that we can prove what's possible and then roll these things out to other small and medium-sized breweries across the province, which is many. So again, that whole idea of not letting perfection get in the way of progress is very much realistic for the carbon dioxide we release from fermentation, also with our water use as well. So I'll just show you a few pictures here. This is the algae bioreactor here. So on the left is actual algae. And on the right two photos there, you see the kind of purple tote is actually the tote that has algae in it. It has that light color because that's the right color for algae to grow in this scenario. And then you see Leonard in the middle there. He's the professor with the blue shirt. He's actually working to capture the carbon dioxide off of our fermentation tank. He's actually capturing it in a giant weather balloon. And then they're compressing that CO2 gas from the weather balloon into a compressor and storing it in scuba tanks. And those scuba tanks then get fed, they then dissipate the CO2 into the algae tanks. And that allows the algae to work with that CO2 and convert it. So this is just one of the cool things. That system lives down the street from us. It's a Penticton solution to fermentation, which is something that happens across this province, not only in beer, but in other beverage industries. So really cool solutions. Again, it's not the perfect solution, but it's a really good one, and it gets us moving down the road. This is I talked just really quickly there about water, and obviously beer is a big consumer of water. We are working to really understand our water footprint, but again, that's not perfect yet. But one of the things we're doing with Okanagan College is actually measuring. We've looked at all of our processes in beer making and know how much water we use in each of those processes. And what that's allowing us to do is to then start to figure out where we can reuse water. So this woman here is actually testing some of the water from one of the processes to see if we're able to reuse it, to make sure the water chemistry is safe and good so that we can reuse. So again, it's not our entire process where we're driving water reduction, but there are areas where we are really starting to focus in to really start to reuse and not letting perfection get in the way of progress. We're making progress towards being perfect. Last but not least, what you can do about it, how you as a beer drinker can be a force for environmental good. Buy local, support green businesses like us. We really can't do what we do without you. If we don't have a business, we can't do amazing things in this community. And so it's really important to support your local green businesses who are trying really hard to make change. And those changes we are making are radiating across this province and across this country. And that's really meaningful. When you buy local, your money stays in this community. There's this idea of the economic multiplier. So every dollar you spend with me, $6 stays in this community. That used to be the stat. I think it's something like that, because we use local bookkeepers and accountants and lawyers, and we, shop locally and all of these other things. So when you support a local business, the ripple effect is huge in our community. So just something to think about. There are these things called growlers. They're like a 1.86 liter glass jar, basically just like a milk jar that you can fill with beer. So instead of buying your beer in cans, which are fine, you can actually buy a refillable beer container and refill your beer across the city of Penticton at any brewery, and you just clean those glass growlers out and you can refill. They're less expensive from us to buy beer that way, and it's also fun. The other thing you can do, bring back those plastic beer toppers. We take them from anywhere, from any brewery across the province. It doesn't matter the color. Bring them to us. We will reuse them all and keep them circulating, keep them reusing and recirculating. I think I'm over my time, but that's it, Lori. I'm done. Any questions, anybody?
Yes, that was great, Alexis. Boy, so we do have some good questions in the chat. Avril asks, will Tin Whistle be able to transition energy towards some form of renewables and away from fossil gas? We use the word fossil gas these days.
Yes, no, great question. So our biggest use of fossil gas is that brewing kettle that I mentioned. It's the kettle that it's like a tea kettle, essentially. It boils 2,000 liters of water for us when we brew. There are actually no commercially viable electric kettles yet at this point. If there was one, I would be the first to be interested in it, and I would hope there would be some incentive programs through Fortis BC to help small businesses to adopt those technologies. But there is not available technology yet at this point. And so I don't have a solution, especially on the natural gas side at this point. It is something that I'm kind of have on my radar and I'm always on the lookout for, but it isn't something we're seeing yet. And so we have to wait sometimes for those technologies to come forward to us. Unfortunately, I would way rather be electric, and you see a lot of people electrifying where they can, and we're doing our best to move that way. But we need the technology to be there too. So at this point, being the most efficient I could be with that technology is the best I can do at this point.
That's great.
Great question.
Thank you. And Robin asks, what happens to the mash? What happens to your waste product?
Yeah, great question. So we have a few waste products in the production of beer. So ours, they call it spent grain or the mash, which is the leftover grain. So a mix usually of like barley, wheat, oats. They're very very wet, very moist. Ours gets in a container and gets to a local farmer picks it up. And takes it. He has a cattle and a pig farm, and so he feeds that mash, the spent grain, to a local, pigs and cows. That's what pretty much every brewery in this town does currently. But I don't like to just stop there. So I always like to do more. So we're working with Okanagan College on another project because they have this great federally funded research center called the BCB TAC that I mentioned a couple of times there. And so we're actually looking at ways to use spent grain in different ways. Can we make it into, can we compress it to use it to power fuel as a fuel source, like like for stoves, as a kind of a little pellets for stoves? Can we upcycle it to be used or to reuse it in a food way, like in a food manufacturing process? It's been used in dog food before. It can be used, you can dehydrate it and make it into flour for bread. I've had local small businesses doing that, and some people make dog treats and stuff with it. The reality is I have crazy volumes of it, and it has to be used very quickly. It's very wet. Smells like stinky gym socks after about a day. So it has to be used. The whole volume has to be used, and it has to be used quickly. But there's an incredible opportunity there because we have so much of it in Penticton in a very small radius, right? We have 8 breweries here in this town, and they're all within kind of a few mile radius of each other. So there's an incredible opportunity to use it to do something else with it other than just to feed animals. We could reuse it to make something else as an input for another system, and really that circular economy concept is really possible here. But again, working with researchers right now to figure out what that is, and everything takes time, and I'm always wanting to go really quickly, but everything takes time. And so we're looking at what properties spent grain has that we can use to do something with. Where is it good for biofuel? Is it best for making wood pellets? Is it best as a food input? What is it best for? So that's some of the research that's happening right now to figure out what properties it has and where it would best be suited.
Boy, that's really exciting. Avril also asks, is Tin Whistle heading up any kind of education of the other local brewers to follow your lead?
Yeah. So, I mean, we have the incredible thing about the craft beer industry in BC and across the country really is how collaborative craft brewers are. At first, I don't come from beer. I mentioned that before. It really threw me off. Every brewery in this town came to welcome us to Penticton and brought us beer in the first week we were here. We're competitors. That doesn't happen in big centers, right? Like you don't see that. I worked in Toronto for a lot of years. You take your competitor down. And that doesn't happen here. And it's an incredible asset to this community that we work so well together, that we build this as a destination for beer together, that we support each other in our operations almost daily. We support each other by lending materials and helping out where people are struggling. And so we already have a regular conversation going, and a lot of the research we're doing with Okanagan College will then be fed through to our other breweries locally, especially around the spent grain piece and all of those, because the reality is that we need action, but we also need a lot of people to act, right, in this climate crisis. The time is now. And so what I'm doing is to prove what's possible so that I can share out. And because this industry is so collaborative, it's just ripe for that kind of collaboration to happen, both in Penticton and in the province. This work I'm doing is shared with our industry at conferences. I've presented there. I present regularly there, talking to our industry about what's possible and why we should care.
I'm curious, have you seen anybody locally make changes because of what you have shared with them? Have they made changes like you've made?
Yeah. The Pack Tech one, which do people know when I say Pack Tech, I'll just shine one here. These guys.
Yeah.
That Pack Tech. Pretty much everyone in this town is taking those back now. Some people, I do an incentive, so I offer my customers 25-cent credit for every one they bring back. That's what I pay for them, and I would rather offer that to my customer than to pay China 25 cents to make more. And so I think they're made in North America now, but I use China because why not? Everything's made in China. So I offer an incentive for it, but pretty much every brewery in this town is taking them back. Whether they're reusing them in-house or not is up in the air. But I'm taking them back, providing an incentive and reusing them right here. Which is amazing. So there's lots of uptake on that because it's a really easy thing for people to do. Folks are starting to do those Fortis funded energy studies. They're free. They're really easy for people to jump on and take advantage of. And so folks are starting to do those things as well. And the water piece has been really critical for us to really understand. And so folks are starting to kind of dig into the data and stuff there too. So stay tuned. There'll be a lot from our industry. This is really mission critical. It has to be mission critical because it threatens our business as usual.
I'm sure that all of the things that you've mentioned also help to reduce your cost. If you're more efficient with fossil gas, then you're going to be spending less. If you're more efficient with
Absolutely.
water usage, then you're going to be paying less as well. So
totally. It's such a win-win. And people often, there's always people say, it costs more to be environmental. Sustainability is expensive. I've heard these, I've worked in green business, sustainable business for like almost 20 years at this point. That's always the one that comes to the table. But I'm here to prove it's not, that you can have a viable business. This is the whole point of what we're doing, is to have a viable business that is carbon neutral, zero waste, but also successful. Because if I can do that, then anyone can do that. One of the cool, I was talking about these beers. So this is the Cherry Blossom Japanese lager here. So 20% of the grain for the grain bill. So 20% of the grain bill for this beer was that spent sake rice. I paid nothing for the spent sake rice. Grain is very expensive. It's doubled in the time that we've owned the business. And so I'm actually producing a lower cost beer that commercially is very interesting to people. This beer sold out in like a month. And unfortunately, I can't get more sake rice just yet because I used 2 months worth of his sake rice. So he doesn't have any more. But it's very viable to make really interesting, compelling beers with people's waste. This is the other one here. This is the this is called Wasted Grape. This one is made with the skins from the wine harvest, which have been prevalent up until this year. I think we'll still be able to make this beer again. We make it in the fall because that's when the skins are available. But our brewer has developed a way of brewing with waste ingredients so that we continue to keep their flavor, but we work with them because they come in, spent grape skins can come in with things on them and some wild yeast and things like that. So we've developed a way to work with these ingredients to still let them shine through, and yet provide flavor from a completely free ingredient. For me, that's the exciting stuff. We've made beers from the gin botanicals left over from Wildflower Distilling's gin production. They make a Saigon gin with like 24 botanicals. We made a gin saison with it. It wasn't my favorite beer. It didn't knock it completely out of the park, which is why we haven't brewed it commercially. But we tried it. I've got a distiller in Summerland, CE Distilling, that called me the other week saying, I've got all these grapefruits and oranges. I take the rind to make Amaro with, but I have the pulp and the juice left. Can you use it for anything? So in this region, we have an incredible wealth of, agricultural kind of byproducts or waste or whatever you want to call them, that people are dying to get rid of or to see used in another way. Because we hate food waste, right? Like we feel bad about wasting food and we feel bad about things not being used. And there's some incredible ways to use them. We just have to kind of invent a way to use them. And that's what we're doing here, to prove what's possible. So I think it's really exciting time, especially from a business perspective because ingredient prices are rising and we're using things that are locally available for free. So, and I hope we will pay for them. I hope they won't be free forever because then they are not a waste if there's a value to them. But the whole concept of it reducing cost is a real winning point.
Absolutely. And so Kathy has asked about the fossil gas use and going to electricity, which you've
Yep.
already addressed. But she also
Yep.
asked, how do you know that you're carbon neutral? How is that quantified?
Yeah. Yeah. So we have measured you saw that little bar chart there that I showed about the carbon footprint. So we've measured our entire carbon footprint. That's the majority of it, but there's a bit of a chunk, there's a few other chunks in there, but that's the majority of it from the natural gas, and waste is our primary piece. So we measured our entire carbon footprint. So we know it's measured in tons of carbon equivalent, CO2 equivalent. So we know the total amount. Every year we measure it. So we do it for our fiscal year, which ends in February. So we measure our total carbon footprint for the year. We take all of our electricity and natural gas bills and fermentation numbers and all these other things. They all come together and they give us a total CO2 equivalent for what we're actually releasing into the atmosphere from our business operation. And then we're buying carbon offsets to balance it. So we buy certified carbon offsets. So they're not double counted, they're verified by science, all these other things. And we've bought from the Great Bear Rainforest Project. We've bought from every year we look at what's available on the carbon market and we buy what we think is mainly we're looking for local BC kind of options. There's lots of like Indian solar and other kind of carbon offsets available on the market, but we buy BC. And so we bought from an anaerobic digestion facility last year. And so they're absorbing carbon dioxide through their processes. We're releasing and we're balancing out by buying those carbon offsets for the same amount. Carbon offsets can be contentious. People, if you're not focused on reduction, people can say you're trying to just kind of pay to lessen your impact. And I can see that point, but the reality is I can't get to zero on my own at this point, but reduction is a daily part of our operation. We are working day in, day out to reduce our emissions through all kinds of things that I outlined there and more. And so if you're focused on reduction and you're driving down as far as you can possibly drive, then buying offsets balances you out. And so that's great. I hope to one day never buy carbon offsets and just be natural at zero myself, but it's going to take a while to get to that point because technology isn't there yet for me, especially around that kettle that we talked about, the natural gas powered kettle. So that's kind of how we get to zero, to neutral.
Sue asks, do you know if our local Chamber of Commerce here supports local businesses in their sustainable initiatives like TOTA does? That's the Thompson Okanagan Tourism Association. They support and encourage member businesses to be sustainable.
Absolutely.
Does our Chamber of Commerce do that or not really?
Not that I'm not I have to be honest, I'm not a member of the Chamber of Commerce. I do a lot of work with Travel Penticton because we're a tourism business too at the end of the day. And Travel Penticton is starting to do work around that, really recognizing that climate change is impacting us as a destination. And so we need to, and they're under TOTA as well. They're a part of TOTA. But to be honest with you, like I've lived in Toronto, Saskatoon, Vancouver, and now the Okanagan. There certainly isn't the awareness in the Okanagan that there is in other major centers. I have, as you can see on the top of my beer label, carbon neutral brewery, because I'm trying to be very forward with that. I'm bringing values to the table. And it's not, to be honest, I don't know how many people come to my brewery because I'm carbon neutral.
Well, they don't before, but they will now.
They may now. Exactly.
Yes.
There you go, Lori.
That's
they will now. And I
do.
also, in part, I would love for them to come and support me because I'm a green business, but I still have to make really compelling beer and really great beer and be a really thriving business and be carbon neutral. Like that's the ideal, right? To make incredible beer, be carbon neutral, and be a thriving business all at one time. And so if people are coming to me just because my beer's amazing, well, and they happen to be doing good at the same time, amazing. if you're coming to me because I'm green and environmental, that's amazing. It really is meaningful to me, because we put so much behind this. And so conversations like this are lovely for me, because I don't get to have these conversations a lot, because a lot of our customers don't ask those questions. And so it's really nice for me, for people like Lori and for all of you to come and join and chat about this work, because it's really critical to our industry, but it's also really meaningful to me personally. I'm a mom with 3 kids. I see climate change. I see forest fires coming over the mountains every day. I don't want that for the future of my kids. And so this work is really personal that we do here. And so if you can support a business that's being thoughtful and green and doing their best, it's really meaningful. Personally, it's really meaningful because we're a family business, but it's also really meaningful wider.
That's great. And do you know if there's any local or provincial grants for businesses who undertake sustainable actions?
Yeah, there's actually a really great one that just came up that I just applied for. There's not a lot. Like Fortis BC has energy reduction money for certain projects. And I got one for my, I have a compressor that they funded, some of my more efficient compressor. But they actually just came out with Destination BC has a sustainable tourism grant that just closed. I just applied for it to actually change some of my chilling equipment to make it more efficient. And they are offering 50% of the bill for kind of energy reduction projects, for sustainability certifications, for a few different things. And it's 50% is really meaningful. Like that for small business can really push us over the finish line on some projects that are really, really critical, but that we just can't payroll ourselves sometimes. This project would see us basically shut down an entire 25-year-old chilling system on our roof. That's the motor logger that David from the city and I were working on together. We were gathering the data for that project because I had to prove the reduction from that project, and that would basically shut down a 25-year-old chiller with really old refrigerant that's now outlawed because refrigeration and refrigerants have high global warming potentials that contribute to climate change. Anyway, I would basically outlaw that entire system and move all of my chilling over to a very efficient chiller that we brought online a year or 2 ago. And it's the right kind of refrigerant gas that doesn't have a high global warming potential, and it's just a more efficient chilling system. So with that money, I could push that over the finish line. So really, those grants are really critical, and that one's amazing, brought forward for tourism businesses specifically around climate resiliency and around climate change kind of action, which hallelujah for that.
Oh, Alexis, this has been so interesting and so exciting. So I'd like to thank you so much for sharing all of your enthusiasm and your hard work with us.
Thank you, Lori.
Yeah,
Yeah, Well, hopefully that everyone who didn't attend tonight watches this because it's very inspiring, and not just the brewing industry, but all businesses can learn through the process you've gone through with measuring and then taking action.
Oh, Barbara, what are you doing?
Just before we wind up, we're just about out of time here. A couple of announcements. First Things First does not have deep dives during the summer. We're taking a little break. So our next Zoom discussion will be in the fall. Just take a look at our website in September or sign up for our newsletter, and then you can stay in the loop. We will
Can I
be at
say
the
one
market.
event that's coming up, Sue, after you?
Sure. Yeah. Just mention that we'll be at the markets this summer. We've hired a student, Sophie Robinson, and she's going to help run our booth. So if you're at the Penticton, Naramata, or Summerland Market and you see her, take a stop and have a little chat with her. So yeah, Alexis, if you have an announcement, and then I think Lori has a couple before we say
Perfect. Next
goodbye.
Thursday at Tin Whistle Brewing is a climate cafe. The United Church in Penticton has got funding to bring community folks together to have conversations around climate and climate resiliency. and all of these pieces. And it's one of the first conversations that they've been funded to kind of support and to bring to the table. It has nothing to do with United Church. They're just the conveners. And I think it'll be really great. Their goal is to really bring people together to start to drive action together and to really see people partner and collaborate, and to learn what's happening in our community around all of these things, which is so critical to know what's kind of happening. So that people can work together and really lead some change. So next Thursday, Tin Whistle, 6:30 p.m. I posted on Instagram today. You can RSVP or not, it doesn't matter. But come if you are looking for something to do next Thursday.
Thank you so much. And the Green Drinks meets often at the Tin Whistle too, and it's kind of similar. It's for people concerned about climate and working in the industry. So yeah, so thank you for hosting these wonderful discussions. This weekend on the 23rd up in Peachland at the Okanagan Folk School, Michaela Cannon will be hosting a workshop about her new book on foraging, which is basically identifying weeds in your yard and eating them. And it's really a fascinating book. And she's a wonderful presenter. She's from Armstrong Spellimcheen, and she started a climate group there. And she's really a dedicated farmer who's working on all sorts of things. And she's a wonderful presenter. Next Tuesday, the 25th at 8 a.m. is Cities for Everyone, and they are online at 8 in the morning. I've been watching them for over a year now. There's often 500 people on a call all over the world. And this one next week is going to be about Gil Penalosa, who's the leader in Copenhagen, talking about how they have really worked on greening up the city and cycling and adapting to a better city. And then next Thursday evening, if you are in Peachland and not here for the Climate Cafe, Peachland Watershed Protection Alliance is having a guest speakers and talking about protecting the forest and also protecting the water. And the guest speakers are going to be Grouse and Pamela Barnes, conservationist from the Wilderness Committee. Cedar George Parker and Lucero Gonzalez will be the joint keynote speaker, James Stadel of Stop the Spray. Now, I'm going to be putting all this information into the follow-up email, so you don't have to remember these things. They're going to be coming to you in your email with links, and the link to the Climate Cafe as well. So you'll be getting the recording link and all of this other information. And I think that's it from me.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. And I guess that's it. Have a lovely summer with your friends and family, and hopefully you have some downtime to relax. So goodbye from all of us at First Things First.
Have a great summer. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. And yeah, good night.